This will probably come as a surprise to no one, but I am a huge fan of the Digimon franchise. As a kid, I watched diligently through Adventure, and Zero Two, and Tamers. However, by the time I had heard about Digimon Frontier, it had already been sold to Disney, and, well, I just couldn't bring myself to watch it on that channel, so I missed out on seasons 4 and 5, though I do plan on revisiting them eventually and finishing off the series. However, I wasn't just a fan of the series itself, I was also a really big fan of the Digimon video games that were coming out at roughly the same time. Some of them were really good, some of them were boring, and some of them were just down silly. But one of the big highlights of the entire series was the Digimon World series. Each game felt wholly standalone, but did very unique things with the license. What really impressed me with the series was the fact that none of them used the anime license, instead just taking the concept of Digimon and doing whatever they wanted with it, while still adhering to the rules that had been set up by the Digimon mythos. It was really well thought out, and all of these games are still really fun to play now, though some of them are kind of dated by today's standards. I mean, most of them were released on the PlayStation and the early PS2. Now, I outline this because I just want you to know where I'm coming from when I say that Digimon World 4 is one of the biggest disappointments that I have ever purchased. Being a huge Digimon fan is one thing. When you come across something that should be representative of a series... So I just want you to know where I'm coming from when I say that Digimon World 4 is one of the most disappointing games I have ever had the misfortune to play. Even if I wasn't a fan of Digimon, which, granted, I wouldn't have this game if I wasn't a fan, it's still not very good of a game overall. As if the number 4 on the title wasn't enough to tell us that. Now, I'm playing the PS2 version of the game, but at the time of its release, it was released on the GameCube and the Xbox. But all three games are virtually identical, save for a few shifts in control. So, let's dig in and see just why I can't stand this game. First of all, I'm sure there's supposed to be a story somewhere in this game, but I'll be damned if I can figure it out. The plot doesn't really seem to make any sense, and what little plot we get is actually very few and far between, as we'll see when we get to the gameplay of this game. The beginning also doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. It's kind of pretty, to be honest, but it doesn't really tell us much about the game itself. And judging by the way it revels in Dokumon's appearance, I'm going to guess that this is actually a licensed game based off of a fully CGI Digimon movie that was only released in Japan. Now, I'm not sure about that, so if anybody has any answers, please feel free to let me know, because otherwise I'm just going to assume that this is assuming that I have seen that particular movie, which I have not, which it bodes very ill for this game. Alright, well, if I had to guess, I think the story focuses on some big Digimon organization that's dedicated to keeping the digital world safe from anything that might threaten it, and one of the main threats in this game is the X-Virus, yeah, real creative name, which is apparently creating entirely new servers and infecting Digimon and turning them evil. You know, like the Black Gears or the Black Spirals from Season 1 and 2 respectively. Now this is where we come to one of the first major missteps of the game. There's no interaction between humans and Digimon in this game. In fact, I don't think a single human shows up at any time during this game, which is a major disappointment because the entire Digimon franchise is pretty much based around the interaction between humans and Digimon. In fact, all of the series and most of the games use that as a key plot point at some point or another, but this one focuses specifically on the Digimon. Now, this in and of itself isn't really a bad idea. I mean, giving the Digimon more personality could be really, really cool. Anybody who's watched the series knows that they don't have much personality on their own, with a few minor exceptions. However, this means that we have no everyman character. The Digimon in this game toss around location names and key terms as if everybody already knows them, leaving the player completely out of the experience. We're completely separated from this world. And I once again reiterate that the entire idea behind the Digimon mythos is humans getting immersed in this digital world. Anyway, moving on to the real game breaker of this game, the gameplay. The game starts out by letting you choose from 4 different Digimon to control: Guilmon, Agumon, Vmon, and Doramon. 3 of these 4 are beloved characters used in the series, and one of them is from a CGI movie that I know nothing about. Smooth. Ironically, you'll be seeing me use Doramon the most during this review. Anyway, you start off in a hub world where you can run through, gather information from characters, buy what you need, save your game, and so on and so forth. I'll be coming back here quite often because a majority of the gameplay is actually done in here. However, the real meat of the gameplay happens when you are transported to one of the specific locations in the digital world, and this is where the game really starts to lose me. If you haven't already guessed it, can you guess what kind of game this is ripping off? 5 seconds. Yep, that's right, people. This game is a Gauntlet clone, and a poor Gauntlet clone at that. Oh yes, because when I think of a world formed from all the data and computers around the world, with monsters that can evolve into several different forms and use magical attacks on one another, I think Gauntlet. However, this also leads us to the next big misstep in this game, and if you've been watching any of the gameplay footage so far, you've probably already spotted it. Why are the 4 Digimon that I'm controlling uses axes and swords and... Holy crap, they gave Vmon gats! Oh god, this is so wrong. Now, to be fair, there are plenty of Digimon throughout the franchise that do use weapons, because that's how they were designed. Heck, some of them even use firearms. The problem is that these particular 4 were not designed to use weapons. Each of them had a signature attack that reflected what kind of Digimon they were, and it's clear that their hands aren't even designed to hold these weapons. None of the Digimon in this game are able to use their signature moves. There's no Pepper Breath, no Pyro Blaster, and no V Headbutt. Though that last one might not have worked so well. But my point is, it doesn't even feel like you're playing as a famous Digimon. And I remind you that Vmon, Agumon, and Guilmon were very famous as the Digimon partners of the leaders in the first 3 seasons. The closest thing that the Digimon in this game get to their signature attacks are just some generic magic spells that you can throw here and there, like Fire, Ice, and Bolt, names that were played out even before the original Final Fantasy was released. Oh, but actually I lied, because even though the Digimon that you control can't use their signature attacks, the enemies that you fight certainly can. Ogremon will use his Pummel Whack, Numamon will use Party Time, and so on and so forth. But you're just stuck swinging an axe, shooting a gun, or throwing a magic spell. Now, if it seems like I'm bitching about the continuity aspects of this game quite a bit, and if they seem a little nitpicky to you, well, fair enough. But you have to remember, this is a game that is built to attract fans of a specific franchise. When I pick up a game that is licensed and is meant to be part of the Digimon mythos, there are certain things that I expect to be in there, such as being able to use a Digimon's signature attack, being able to Digivolve, etc., etc., etc. However, this game does not deliver very much of any of that, which is why it's such a huge disappointment. When you pick up a licensed game, you are pretty much a fan of whatever it is you're picking up, or at least that's the general idea behind it. When you don't include familiar aspects of a franchise or a license in your game, you're alienating your own audience. But if you'd prefer, I will stop bitching about the continuity and instead start bitching about the gameplay itself. Anyway, like I said before, the game is pretty much a clone of the Gauntlet series, which basically entails you running through different areas and dungeons, mashing the attack button as you slog through waves upon waves of enemies over and over until you finally reach the end goal, fight a boss, and then move on. But this is where the game really starts to get difficult. It's obvious that the game was meant for multiplayer only. In fact, it encourages you to use all 4 players while playing this game, because the difficulty, even on easy mode, is so obscenely high for a single player that it makes it almost unbearable unless you have a friend who's willing to play this game constantly with you. One of the main problems is that when you start out, you have next to nothing. You only have the most basic gear, no armor, no sub-chips, only 3 weapons, no money, and no items, meaning that you're pretty much going out into the world naked, and you need to grind for experience, items, and gold really quickly. The problem is that at your first level, the enemies in the starting area take upwards of 10 to 20 hits to bring down with your basic weapons, and they attack so fast that they'll drain your hit points really fast. The only way you'll survive for more than a few minutes when you first walk out of the hub world is to either A, equip the guns, which are impossible to aim and fire so slowly that most enemies don't have a problem catching up to you, or B, to spam your magic attacks. But since you start out with so few magic points, you're basically going to run out the first few times you use it when you've only killed 2 or 3 enemies, thus leaving you completely vulnerable to all the other enemies. The fact that the enemies attack in such large groups would be bad enough, but most of them even have ranged attacks, making it very difficult to deal with them while they're in melee range. And even worse than that, enemies will block your attacks constantly, dragging out battles much longer than they should last. The block mechanic is actually one of the most frustrating aspects of this game, not just because the enemies block you constantly, but because it's barely useful when you use it as well. Now, the way blocking is supposed to work is that when you hit the block button, a square shield will appear in front of you for a very short amount of time, meaning that you have to carefully time your button presses in order to block oncoming enemy attacks. The problem with this is that the window of opportunity, the time when the shield stays up, is just so small that most of the time you'll either over or undershoot your button press, meaning that the attack will just hit you anyway, and if the shield goes down while the enemy is in the middle of an attack, you will still take damage. Even worse is the fact that enemy attacks are so fast and they give very little telegraph as to what they're going to do that you'll almost never be able to bring up the block in time. Now, aside from rapidly mashing the attack button and using magic spells, you do have a few other ways of defending yourself. One is a charge attack, which you will never use against enemies and only use to bust down a few doors in your way, because it doesn't cause any more damage than your ordinary attack and takes too long to charge and enemies can still block it. And you also get a special spin attack, which you instigate by rotating the control stick 360 degrees and then pushing the attack button. Useful for when you're surrounded, but very difficult to pull off because it only works when it wants to. And the only other reason I bring up that move in this review is because then I can do this. Anyway,